thank you again for the introduction, Verva, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with all y'all. I always like to start off the presentation with this really neat photo I had found some years back. It is, obviously an old Purple Martin house from back in the 1930s, and that's up in Wisconsin. And just a really neat photo. It's I wish it was still as easy to attract martins today as it was back then, but unfortunately it's not. And we'll go into some reasons as to why it's not as easy as it once was. So a lot of times I ask people, especially being in the southern part of the United States, pretty much most, if not all of us, have seen the large apartment style birdhouses that are high up on these tall poles. And, they come in all shapes and sizes and just different, just all sorts of different designs. And, like I say, most people have seen them, but there's a lot of people that don't know what species they're really tailored to attract. And that's, I start telling about the purple martins, and a lot of them are, we have a lot of backyard birds, and they're all really bring their own special thing to the table. But definitely the martins are unique in many ways. It separates them from a lot of our normal backyard birds, and that's we're gonna go through a lot of that stuff, and I think you'll come away with a lot more of an appreciation for not only when you see this type of housing, but definitely if you see martins actually nesting in these houses. This is another just example you may see of gourds. Gourds are a really popular option, especially in the southern half of the martins range, in the southern half of the United States. In the eastern part of the United States, I'll go over that as well. This particular subspecies is unique to being east of the Rocky Mountains. So we'll start by purple martins are in the swallow family. They are the largest North American swallow. There are 3 subspecies of purple martins. The subspecies that we're going to be focusing on, the subspecies that is completely dependent on human supplied housing, is the Prognathes subus, and then the subspecies is subus. And again, they nest east of the Rocky Mountains in the United States and up into Canada. The 2 other subspecies, you have a Arboricola subspecies, which nest in the Pacific Northwest, and a Hesperia subspecies, which nest in oftentimes large saguaro cacti, in the old woodpecker holes. The two other subspecies in the west of the Rocky Mountains, by and large, nest in a lot of natural cavities, natural structures. Though there are a lot of conservation efforts that are putting human supplied nest boxes in place just due to a loss of habitat, their natural habitat. Purple martins are secondary cavity nesters, meaning that they don't excavate their own cavities as a woodpecker would. They nest in cavities that have already been created by someone or something else. They're communal nesters. They like to nest in large groups. They're a neotropical species, meaning that they winter down in the neotropics, down in South America, in the region down in South America, and I'll show a map of that as well. They are federally protected, and so they are a well-protected species. And again, like I was mentioning, the eastern subspecies, which is what we're going to be talking about, is completely dependent on human-supplied housing. So a lot of people ask, well, how and why are they dependent on human-supplied housing? Because that obviously has not been the case forever. And that's right. Before the first humans arrived, approximately 12,000 years ago, even the eastern subspecies of purple martins nested in natural structures, like old woodpecker nests, or just various cavities found in dead tree snags, or the sides of of cliff faces. And then over hundreds or possibly even thousands of years, there was what's called a behavioral tradition shift. Now, this shift was triggered by the Native Americans. And for there to be a successful behavioral tradition shift in a species of, in this case, birds, it obviously has to be beneficial for the species, or the shift would not take place. And thankfully, in this case, the Indians and Native Americans would hang up hollowed out gourds and quickly realized that they were attracting these really, I'm sure they were, beautiful and fun to watch, were attracting these birds to the gourds. And the martins, I'm sure, quickly realized that the gourds that were being hung, especially cleaned out and prepared and hung just for them, were considerably nicer than the old, dead tree cavities or old spider-infested woodpecker cavities that they had been using before. But another thing is martins realized that being in close proximity to humans meant that their natural predators were not around, that human activity kept their natural predators at bay by and large. And so that was another thing that was a big benefit to the martins as well. Those factors, of course, contributed to higher reproductive success. And again, was the whole catalyst for this behavioral tradition shift. And today, east of the Rockies, that now that eastern subspecies nest only in human supplied housing. It's interesting to note in a book, in his book American Ornithology, Alexander Wilson took a point of noticing when he visited Choctaw and Chickasaw Indian settlements during the late 1700s, that he actually observed a lot of these gourds that had been hollowed out, prepared, and hung on the poles for purple martins. And back then, even going back that far, Wilson was even quoted as saying, even the solitary Indian seems to have a particular respect for this bird. There are also documents from the 18th and 19th centuries that suggest that the Native Americans sought to attract martins to their villages because they would chase away crows from their food crops, from their cornfields, chase away vultures that were trying to feed off and tear up hides or meats they'd hung out to dry. Martins naturally will develop sort of there's an airspace around their colony where they're nesting that they'll defend especially from other birds. And the Indians noticed that and used that to their advantage as well. So it was a symbiotic relationship. Today, these behavioral tradition shifts that took place at the martins are extremely rare. In fact, there's only 3 North American bird species that have experienced a complete tradition shift in a similar manner. And of course, purple martins are one, chimney swifts are another one, and barn swallows are the third one. So all 3 of those species nest only in or on human-made structures. So pretty amazing. So we went from this, and if you can kind of pretend that this was an eastern subspecies martin that was nesting in a old woodpecker cavity or something. That's actually a photo of a northwestern arboricola subspecies martin. But for this point, we can just kind of imagine that's what it was like, thousands of years ago. And then, of course, the shift with the Native Americans hanging up the gourds and the martins really starting to take advantage of that situation, to what we have now, manufactured, human supplied housing. This is actually a picture of the purple martin housing here at U of H Clear Lake that belongs to the Environmental Institute of Houston. And you can probably notice that switch over here, there is a mix of conventional aluminum style housing as well as the traditional gourds. And one reasoning behind doing that is if you're trying to attract martins for the first time, you increase your chances by offering, the more of a variety of housing you offer, the greater your chances are of attracting them. And I'm in the along the agree with the theory rather that whatever, if a martin had been hatched and fledged from a conventional style martin house, that's typically what they're going to be looking for when they come back as an adult. And the same goes with gourd. So you can really increase your chances by offering both. Let's see. Go back. And bear with me, I seem to have lost my pointer. There it is. Okay, the diet. What do purple martins eat? Purple martins, as is the case with all swallows, are aerial insectivores. Flying insects make up their entire diet. These are three examples of a lot of the bugs that they eat. Of these three, the dragonfly is definitely at the top of their list. That's definitely their favorite menu item. That's no doubt what they probably take the most advantage of. Of course, you know, wasps constitute a large part of their diet. Mosquitoes, there is some debate as to whether or not purple martins do eat mosquitoes, and if they do, is it enough to really talk about? Personally, based on the testimonials of a lot of really experienced martin landlords over the years, I'm convinced that though certainly not the majority of their diet by any means, that purple martins do eat mosquitoes. Again, is it enough to say if you're hosting a martin colony, your mosquito problems are over? No, but there have been a lot of really reliable testimonials where people have said that once they had an active martin colony on their property, that the amount of mosquitoes noticeably dropped. So again, I believe that they do eat some mosquitoes. But again, that certainly doesn't make up the bulk of their diet. What's interesting is some people, it's been asked how high up do they fly to feed, and there was a study where altitude loggers were actually used, and it showed that they flew up to, on average, around 3,000 feet to forage on insects. That's really, really high up there. And the same loggers recorded some martins going all the way up to a little over 6,000 feet. So these birds, if you ever get the chance to watch them, you'll notice sometimes they literally will fly basically out of sight. They're up so high. And so they really, really go up high when they're feeding a lot. When they're especially feeding the larger insects, definitely the dragonflies are going to be the ones that are up at those altitudes. So another thing, the fact that they are aerial insectivores, they are susceptible to weather conditions that other birds may not be susceptible to. As a general rule, flying insects, temperatures that are below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, or in conditions where there's a steady rain, strong winds, dense fog, those kind of conditions, most flying insects will cease to be active. If you have extended periods of that, it can be very, very detrimental and fatal to the martins. You can see the average martin will survive for about 4 to 5 days without food, but just after 2 or 3 days, they become significantly weakened. You'll start seeing, if you see the picture of that male martin at the top right, you see the wings starting to droop. They're noticeably looking weak. The picture at the bottom right, that is a little food tray, and martins can actually be sort of conditioned and trained to eat crickets and mealworms out of trays, to be supplemental fed. during the times where food might be scarce. There are some people that have shown a hesitancy in doing that, saying they're afraid that the martins will become more dependent or become dependent on the food that they're putting out and not go out and forage on their own. But I've never seen evidence of that, and there's none that I've ever even heard of that indicate that once the weather permits and the insects are flying again, they go resort back to their instinct and go back to hunting on the wing. So the identification of purple martins. The easiest one, obviously, on the adult, at the top left is the adult male. And you'll see the little acronyms, ASY male. And I'll go into just a minute about what more of that, what that means. But the adult male is no doubt the easiest to identify, all that dark purplish, bluish, color. Below that, at the bottom left, you'll see the adult female, or ASY female. And then at the top right, the subadult male, SY male, and at the bottom right, subadult female, SY female. Now, if you notice, the difference between an adult male and a subadult male is quite obvious. The difference between an adult female and a subadult female, that's more of a challenge to tell the two apart. And I'll show you a trick that a lot of people use that is really the key in helping to identify, differentiate the subadult females from the adult females. The tail feathers, right in here, these are what are referred to as the undertail covert feathers. And if you notice, here is the adult male, very easy to tell. Subadult male, right here, very easy, again to tell. And here is the adult female. Now, if you notice, these are two examples of subadult females. You can see how much darker the undertail covert feathers are on the adult female than they are on either of these subadult female examples. And that's the key in identifying the two, identifying the difference between an adult female martin and a subadult female. And then you have right here, this is an example of an HY martin, which is a fledgling, and that stands for hatching year. Now, let me go back again to these acronyms I was talking about. ASY stands for after second year. SY stands for second year. The reason that they make the distinction is second year martins are martins that were babies the previous year. So second year means that it's their second year of life, and it's their first year as an adult. And so, as you could see by the previous slide, the males especially, they have not developed their full purple suit, if you will, or the females, their full darker plumage. So these come back as subadults. Now, once they migrate south after their subadult season, then they come back as ASY, which is after second year, in this case male, after second year female. Once they're ASY, male or female, at that point, so moving forward, it's impossible without banding and knowing specifically the bird's age. It's really impossible to tell based on plumage, because after that second year, their plumage is all the same from that point forward. So that's what those acronyms are stand for. And again, HY is just hatching year, which is just the baby, and that's the year that it hatched. We talked about earlier that the purple martins are a neotropical species. This is their wintering range in the neotropics. A large number of them are here in the Brazil, different areas of Brazil, all the way down to like the Sao Paulo region of Brazil. So the distances they travel to migrate are amazing. This was a really neat study. Some years back, technology caught up, and what you're looking at right here is a little geolocator. It's like a little backpack. There's a little strap that actually goes around under the martin's wings and then around its little torso and holds it on. And this has allowed them to ornithologists, biologists, to gather all sorts of data on not only martins, but all sorts of birds, including songbirds, that, to find out things that they were only able to speculate on before. Well, in this case right here, this particular martin, which was affectionately known as Martin 17070, was an adult female, an ASY female, that was tagged, had this geolocator attached to her. She was up in her nesting site in Minnesota. If you look at this map right here, the red line and arrows indicate the path when she was heading south for the winter. The black line indicates when she was coming back north to nest again. The dotted lines right here indicate where, sometimes based on, because a lot of these geolocators use the position of the sun, there can be different environmental factors. So what they do is, like, would have a positive hit right here, and then a positive hit right here, but they were having some intermittent issues right here. So they were just kind of drawing a straight line, just kind of surmising that that's the path she took. So if you see the dotted line, that's what that's indicating. But the dots are actually confirmed locations. Here's what's amazing. If you take a minute to look at this map. So she left, the down here in northwestern Brazil around April 16th, started traveling back up north. Stayed, with the exception of right in here, stayed pretty much over Central America. Now here's the mind-blowing part. If you notice right here, she stops to rest right here at the tip of the Yucatan Peninsula from the 24th to the 26th of April. So she leaves the Yucatan Peninsula on the 26th of April. Approximately 24 hours later, she's on the coast of Louisiana. So she made an approximately 600-mile water crossing in about 24 hours. And that, again, is the kind of data that, that researchers had just, had no idea, was even possible. So some of the things that they learned in these studies is that all the track martins flew 2 to 6 times faster during their spring return journey than they did heading south in the fall. One female purple martin raced back north in 12 days, which was averaging a rate of about 358 miles per day. And previous songbirds estimates, again, they were just having to estimate, was for songbirds was approximately 93 miles a day. So 93 miles a day, and then they have this one that was averaging 358 miles in one day. And of course, the one we looked at just a minute ago, approximately 600-mile water crossing, was made nonstop in approximately 24 hours. Now, it's interesting to note right here, what martins will do, and people that have martins or follow along with martin migration on various forums will note, during the early part of the season, when the martins are migrating, we're still having cold fronts. We're still having cold fronts throughout February, even into March. And a lot of times they'll notice when the wind blows out of the north that a lot of the arrivals will come to a halt. No doubt the martins realize, and this may have very well been what this particular female was doing, was sitting right here waiting for the winds to come back out of the south, or at least somewhat of a southerly direction, to help push them across the Gulf. I don't know if these little birds would even be able to make it if they were having to fight any type of headwinds trying to cross this body of water. You hear sometimes about birds winding up to rest on offshore oil platforms or even fishing boats and everything. So that's got to be the most just perilous journey. So to give you an idea of the kind of distances we're talking about, here's a map right here. This little push pin right here is right on the martin housing location, the colony site here at the University of Houston Clear Lake. Down here is in the Sao Paulo region of southeastern Brazil, which is where a lot of them have been known to overwinter. That right there, one way, is 5,200 miles. And they do that again in the wintertime. Unbelievable distances. Now, there is one, I use this as another example. There is one purple martin landlord that has an active colony up in the Alberta province in Canada. And that path is approximately 7,300 miles one way. Absolutely mind-blowing. And if you look at this map, again, we talked about how east of the Rocky Mountains, you have the Rocky Mountains right here. And so sure enough, you have these eastern subspecies of martins that go all the way right up to the edge, but they again are still, they maintain that east of the Rocky Mountains nesting range. So average arrival dates, and this is pretty much, this is pretty accurate. I mean, it varies, depending on, the years, but along the Gulf Coast, in particular, like where we are, like Southeast Texas, you'll start seeing a lot of arrivals throughout February, the earliest arrivals. And generally, pretty much most of the years that I've been tracking or keeping track of it on the Purple Martin, the Conservation Association, they have a scout reporting area page where people report scout arrivals. In Florida, and in particular, the west coast of Florida and central Florida seems to always get the earliest arrivals. And I guess you figure, you look at the close distance right there where they're maybe coming off the Yucatan right there, but this is always the earliest. The Florida landlords that are in this area, some years they will get their first arrivals as early as Christmas time. So it's amazing how early they come back. Now, people ask, well, why the big, range in dates, going, north? I mean, here we have, January and February arrivals. You go up here, in Michigan and Ohio and these areas, you're looking at, April, even May into some of those areas and up into Canada. Well, the martins, they know instinctually, if you can imagine what the weather is going to be like in February up here around the Great Lakes. We talked about flying insects earlier. There would be absolutely none. They would come back to none and literally starve. And unfortunately, as we all found out last year, that horrible freeze that took place in the latter part of February really took a toll. There were a lot of martins that got killed. There were a lot of martins that had already arrived along the Gulf Coast, and that freeze wiped out a lot of purple martins. And so that was one of those unfortunate, just rare events. Now, there were some people that had trained their martins as supplemental feed that were able to get by, but there were a lot of them that really hit not only purple martins, that hit just animals, all species, mammals, birds, fish, you name it. That really took a toll on a lot of our poor animals. Purple martins exhibit a very high level of what's called site fidelity, which means once they have bred successfully at a specific location, those same individuals will return year after year, even if that means just that they raised just one baby to fledging age. Then they'll keep returning back to that same site year after year. Interesting thing is, based on banding studies, it was found that only 5 to 10% of SY, remember the second year martins, the ones that were the babies the previous year, well, they're coming back as first year as adults, so they're looking to start their, start a nest and start their own deal. Only about 5 to 10% of those will return back to their natal site to actually nest. Now, one thing I have noticed, this number gets higher the larger the colony is. So I don't know what the exact percentage difference is, but I do know that there are people with, there's a term, it's called super colony. And generally it's referred to colonies that have around 100 pairs or more. And the super colonies tend to attract a higher percentage of second-year martins than smaller colonies do. But for the most part, this 5 to 10% is pretty accurate. Again, based on similar studies, most of the second-year martins that return to nest at sites that are within. So 5 to 10, only 5 to 10% will return to their natal site, but the ones that don't will still stay within 5 to 10 miles of their natal site. So they don't go too far afield. So let's talk about the housing real quick. Earlier, we talked about the Native Americans and part of that tradition shift, how the martins know that humans are, really an ally, and go do a lot to keep the natural predators at bay. They still adhere to that to this day. The housing must be close to human activity. There's been numerous times where people have put housing up. If they have large amounts of acreage, they'll put a martin house up in a really beautiful, clear location, but it's far from any sort of human activity, and they won't be able to attract them. And so the martins, again, they really like to be near human activity. The height, anywhere from 10 to 20 feet. There's really no set perfect height. Probably no less than 10 feet, I would say, and doesn't really need to be any higher than 20 feet. This is a big one right here. The housing needs to be at least 30 feet away from any tall trees. And the reason for that is the martins know that tall trees make for really good ambush points for aerial predators, hawks in particular. And so they want to be able to see what's coming from a ways away. And so they instinctively, if you have too many tall trees in close proximity to housing, you're going to have a lot of trouble trying to attract them. We talked earlier about providing both types of housing, gourds and housing, and it can consist of either or both. House compartments should be at least 6 inches by 6 inches. Now, we know now that larger is certainly safer. And there's a lot of houses, martin houses, that come out now where you'll have 2 compartments, like on this hexagonal house here, and they'll have in the little center dividers, they'll have a little pre-machined punch out where you can actually open up these center dividers, block off one of the holes, and turn what was 2 smaller compartments into 1 larger compartment. And that definitely helps the martins. The reproductive success goes up, and they typically will lay more eggs in larger compartments as well. And I'll show you why that's another reason why that's really important here in just a minute. Gourds should be at least 8 inches in diameter. Keeping the nest dry is very, very, very important. You want to make sure your house, whether it's a house or gourds, they have good drainage. A lot of times in houses, some of the manufacturers will provide elevated subfloors. We'll actually pick the nest up maybe like a 1/4 of an inch off the floor, which is good to help keep it dry. Drainage holes we talked about, like especially in gourds. Non-water absorbing nest materials. I can't sing the praises enough about pine needles. Pine needles, I think, are arguably the best nest material that martins can use. They don't absorb water, so you never have to worry about them getting soggy and nasty and the little babies, becoming hypothermic or anything like that. For houses that do have the nice larger compartments, larger than 6 by 6, or gourds larger than, say, 7 inches in diameter, starling-resistant entrances are very important. And I'm going to touch on that here also in a few slides. Going back to the housing, the ability to easily lower and raise the house vertically is very important. It talks right here about performing beneficial nest checks or potentially necessary repairs during the season. Nest checks, or some people are like, what are you talking about, nest checks? Well, we're going to talk about that. A lot of times something may be going on in the nest. And if people, if they lower the house while the martins are nesting, say once a week, and just check on things, a lot of times they can catch problems. They can catch mite outbreaks before they get real bad, or other things. And, again, the martins, they will not abandon the nest due to any sort of, lowering the house or the human activity, touching the babies, anything like that. They can't smell. That's kind of an old wives' tale, with the exception, I think, of turkey vultures. The olfactory senses in birds is pretty much non-existent. But we'll talk more about that as well. But the ability to raise and lower vertically is really important. You had a lot of those old style martin house poles that would tilt down, and obviously you couldn't do anything while they were nesting with that, or all the contents would go spilling out. Easy compartment access is another big one. That's another thing, for other reasons, including just end of season clean out. The easier the housing is to lower and raise, the more likely landlords will conduct these routine nest checks and keep up with the housing maintenance, which is so true. If it's a chore, if it's a grueling task to lower and raise the housing, I mean, you're going to be much less interested in wanting to perform nest checks or any sort of maintenance. This is a picture from the EIH martin housing. This was kind of a funny story. There were two adult male martins that were fighting in a gourd, and one took. I was watching it for a little while. One took off, and the other one didn't. I started getting a little concerned. I thought maybe the other one was just hurt or something. So I lowered the housing and took it out. One thing I wanted to point out first is this is actually a nest tray that you can buy these. This one I bought through the Martin Conservation Association. But you see the pine needles. I actually put those in there before the martins arrive. People that are trying to attract martins for the first time, or people that already have martins. But the ones that are trying to attract martins for the first time, another thing, sort of a common misconception is that they feel like that you have to clean the house out. House has to be cleaned or the martins will reject it. Just the opposite. If you have what looks like there was already a bird that had been nesting there previously, the more attractive it is to investigating martins, because they figure, hey, if someone else nested here, it must be pretty good. So that's another reason. Plus, the pine needles, again, non-water absorbing, so I want to make sure I supply them with as much of the good non-water absorbing nest materials as they can. Now they'll do a little of their own housekeeping and add a few things or move a few things, but for the most part, they'll keep the pine needles in there. Going back to this male martin, though, no, he was in there. I lowered the housing, and I pulled the nest tray out. And he sat right there and looked at me for a little while. So I think he was just making sure that even I knew that was his compartment. He won it fair and square, and so he flew off after a little bit. But I thought that was pretty funny. We talk about nest trays or elevated subfloors. That goes back to that whole thing about helping to keep the nest dry. It's a big one. You don't want wet nest. Anything that could pick the nest up off the floor a little bit or provide any sort of additional drainage is always good. Let's see. In gourds, this is looking at the bottom of a gourd. You can see a lot of good drainage holes. That's very important. Any water that does get in, you're going to have some water that gets in with these driving Southeast Texas rains. You just want to make sure that whatever gets in is able to quickly escape, and so everything can dry off nicely. Remember earlier we talked about how the larger compartments are safer for the martins. Well, for many years, 6 inches by 6 inches was sort of the standard compartment size for manufactured purple martin houses, and even available like woodworking plans. That was sort of the standard. If you look at this right here, these are 5 martin babies that are they're not quite at fledge age, but they're getting up there. But these are not ready to fledge quite yet. That's a 6 inch by 6 inch square that's superimposed over those 5 babies. So can you imagine, a martin nest, a clutch, of 4 eggs or 5 eggs is pretty common. So if you can imagine 5 babies and 2 adults, being crammed into this area right here, it would be cramped, uncomfortable, all of the above. To make it worse, this was a deceased great horned owl that the PMCA legally attained. But to show, this is a 6-inch by 6-inch compartment like you would see in a lot of marten houses. That is the great horned owl right there, easily reaching all the way to the back of that compartment. So 6-inch by 6-inch compartments have a, amongst other things, that there's a lot of nicknames, but one of them is some people refer to them as owl feeders, because there's just absolutely, you can see there's no place for the birds to hide. They're susceptible to any type of predatory attack. I talked about earlier, this is a hexagonal house, this is a rectangular house. More and more manufacturers are providing little knockouts already pre-machined in these center room dividers to easily allow you to block off one hole in one of the compartments, open that divider, and then essentially turn a 6-inch by 6-inch compartment into a single 6-inch by 12-inch compartment. And a lot of people say, well, but you're cutting the amount of the available compartments I have to offer in half, which is true, but in a lot of these smaller compartment houses, you rarely ever see 100% capacity. Usually you're hard pressed to find 75% capacity. So at the end of the day, you're really going to do better. Your martens are going to have much better reproductive success enlarging these compartments. It's the amount of compartments you're going to be losing by doing so will be offset and then some by the reproductive success and the increase in the number of eggs and babies that they'll lay by going with the larger compartments. No doubt. Predator protection on these poles. Raccoons, a lot of people don't realize it, but raccoons can easily scale galvanized steel, aluminum poles with not much problem at all. These stovepipe type baffles, actually the way they're mounted, they have a wobbling action, are really effective at stopping raccoons. They get a hold of this, combined with the very smooth surface and the wobbling action, they usually can't get past it. Unfortunately, some of our snakes, in particular the climbing expert rat snakes, can and will circumvent these stovepipe style baffles. This is a picture taken right here of a landlord up in northwestern Louisiana. And this was actually a hack, if you will, that was taken from the bluebird crowd. This is actually garden netting, that poly garden netting you can buy, anywhere to help, cover up, vegetable and fruit garden to keep birds from it. And what was found is if you bunch this up around the pole and attach it really any way you can, just there's really no right way to do it. You just want this wad of this netting around the pole. It was found that the rat snakes, they have no choice but to go up through it, and then they end up getting caught, and they certainly can't back out of it, and they can't go any further forward. And the nice thing about this is this doesn't harm the snake. So as long as you're checking things on a regular basis, and you're brave enough, you can cut the snake free and take the rat snake off, somewhere else. Because rat snakes do, as the name implies, they do serve a good purpose. We just don't want them climbing up your marten house pole. So this is where Verva, this is where I put the question slide right here.
We do have a couple of questions for you, Matt. And the first question is Bruce. Bruce, will you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Matt, I was somewhat amazed by the altitude that the martens can fly. So I was thinking about, we all know about the incident of the airplane that had the bird strike in New York, and Captain Sully landed it. And so there have been reports of purple martens striking aircraft?
That's a good question. Not to my knowledge. The only thing that I've ever heard that has come close, hopefully not too close, to purple martins having any sort of exchange with aircraft is about 5 years ago. At the end of the season, these large pre-migratory roosts form where martins by the tens of thousands will congregate prior to setting off for the migrating south. And there was one, and a lot of times you never know in the different areas, around the country, you never know where where a new roost is gonna set up. It may have been, like in Houston, for example, there was one year it was around, there was a big roost around the Galleria area, and then the next year it moved. And I think now there's been one over, there's two now, there's one down in Stafford, and there's one up on the north side, but you never know where they're gonna be. Well, there was one that established itself in some trees at whatever the large commercial airport is in Oklahoma City. And I know there was some concern understandable concern by airport personnel about that. Now, unfortunately, in that case, in a lot of cases, they resorted to some kind of inhumane pyrotechnics to try to control them and scare them, and ended up just killing and hurting a lot of the martins and everything else. But that's the only time I've ever heard of martins even being near an airport or anything else. But to answer your question, I have never heard of martins in any sort of or any swallows at all being involved in any sort of bird strikes or anything that I'm familiar with. If not saying it hasn't happened, but if it has, I've not heard about it.
All right, thanks, Matt.
Sure.
And Frances Davis Ryan also has a question, and I would ask her to unmute herself and ask her question. And it's something I'm interested in too. So
I'm really enjoying this talk, Matthew. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate you saying that.
A lot of information. You talked about successful nesters having site fidelity. Do successful nesters also have something like date fidelity? Do they get to their nesting site about the same date every year?
That's a really, really good question. And I would say for the most part, yes. One thing that you can see that I've looked at on the Scout Reports, the Scout Report forum that is hosted by the Purple Martin Conservation Association goes back a certain number of years. You can select, previous years, and you can compare when certain people reported their first arrivals. And I for the most part, that is absolutely true. There are people that usually, like, for example, the Floridians are always the show stealers because they're always the ones that get the first arrival. So a lot of people are looking at their dates and everything. And a lot of them are, that's absolutely correct. Their earliest arrivals usually are within a week. If you look at all the years, they usually fall within the same week that they arrive back to their colony. So yeah, that's a really good point. I would say yes to that.
Thank you. We talk about the swallows returning to Capistrano.
Yes. That stands to reason. I guess the swallows, whether they're the large martins or the smaller. I should know that. What are the Capistrano swallows? I think they're cliff swallows. I don't know. But you're right. They seem to be very, very, very timely. They have a very reliable return as far as their timeliness.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. That was interesting to a lot of folks, I bet. Doris Hurd had a question. She said, please ask for her how best to attract to a new house.
Yeah, great question. The thing, and I'm going to go into a little bit more once we start back up on the slides, but what you want to do is probably one of the most important prerequisites, if you will, are not having too many tall trees in close proximity to where your housing is going to be. In the southern part of the United States, especially on the Gulf Coast, we enjoy a higher concentration of martins than our friends further north enjoy, and especially in Canada. So with that, the martins down here are a little more tolerant of tall trees and structures being near their housing as opposed to being further up north. But like I say, generally, that's going to be the biggest thing. If you have a clear area, at least, ideally 30 feet or more between your housing and the nearest trees. And again, putting up housing, if you put up a combination of a conventional house and maybe a few gourds, that'll increase your chances. And preload the nests. That's another big one that a lot of people don't think of. And the pine needles are really good. You can buy a lot of the pine needles from any of the the Lowe's, the Home Depots. Even you can even order some through the Martin Conservation Association, or you may be lucky enough to have the house I lived in before had some beautiful pine trees, and where you can just rake them up and collect them yourself. But to add load the nest up, because basically what you want to do is to make it look like just a pretend bird nest, like there was a martin that had nested there the previous season. So that's another attraction technique. Another thing as well that has helped out a lot of people is there are, I'll touch on this a little bit later in the presentation, there are recordings that you can actually play over like some type of outdoor speaker. The two main ones is there's a dawn song, which is a song that's sung in the pre-dawn hours by adult male purple martins. And there's just a daytime chatter, which is just that. It's just recorded at a colony where there's a number of martins just really chattering it up and singing and everything. Both those are really, really good at drawing in martins, to have a closer look at your site. There's decoys. I'm on the fence a little bit with decoys. The decoys I think work good, but at the same time, I've also heard people that when martins come to visit, they seem to be a little chapped by the presence of the decoys. So I'm not sure. But I think probably more people have benefited from the decoys than have not benefited. But yeah, I mean, I hope that maybe kind of helps a little bit.
Okay, thank you very much. And then Dave Berry has another question for us. David, will you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
And Verva,
Yes.
can I mention one more thing to that previous
Yes.
question? Another thing, and I mentioned this earlier in the presentation, one thing that's really, really, really important, and it will enhance your enjoyment, is to pick a martin house or a housing system. A lot of times you can buy them complete with the pole in the house, that is very easy to raise and lower. And the ones that are the easiest are the ones that either use a rope and pulley or like a winch and cable kind of setup. The ones like you would raise them like you would like a flag up and down a flagpole. Those are really going to make your life a lot easier when you're working with the martin housing and everything else. That's a really big one. Okay, I'm sorry, Verva. There was the next question.
That's okay, and I'm going to read it.
I think I'm unmuted.
Oh, go ahead.
So when hanging gourds, do you take into account the prevailing winds in orienting the gourds?
I usually don't. What's interesting is the gourds. There are two camps when it comes to gourd. That kind of seems like it's the case with a lot of martin things. There's kind of these two opposing schools of thought. One is people talk about, well, if the gourds swing too much, that can jostle the nest contents, or depending on the way you hang them. And you have some people that feel like that the gourds should be stationary, that they should not move at all. I've never really seen an advantage one way or the other. To answer your question, I do not take prevailing winds into account. Most of the manufactured gourds, you know, if you can imagine the neck of the gourd, you know, will either, you know, swing on a vertical axis or a horizontal axis, depending on which model you buy. But no, I've never taken that into account as far as the prevailing winds. Obviously, however you would want to mount them, you would want to make sure, and it would be the same case with a house as well. You would want to make sure that the entrance, that swinging back and forth and side to side, everything is no problem. But you want to make sure that the entrances are never allowed to change compass direction. That you can start to have problems there because the Martins, I know one of the ways that they you know, recognize their particular compartments is based on the compass direction that the entrance is facing. So that's another thing that's real important as well.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, we have a couple more questions and then we'll probably get back to your presentation. And if people have more questions after the next two people, just hold them to the end and we will have Matt answer your questions then. So Joe Bryan has a couple of quick questions and then Tom Zell. So Joe, will you unmute yourself and ask your questions?
Well, I have heard that the swallows returned to Capistrano earlier than before due to global warming. Is that true?
You know, I don't know. I don't know. That's a good question. That would be really interesting to see. But I don't know. You know, there's certainly some interesting climate, you know, anomalies going on surrounding that. So I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't know. I don't know. I apologize. I do not know.
Another version I heard was they returned north of there now.
Now, I had heard that. I had heard that in that particular area that they, I don't know if most of them have or if all of them have chosen some other structure actually near where they used to nest to start nesting. So I did hear that, but it's a really good question. I wish I knew more about those little swallows, but I have heard that. I'm sorry.
What about using ball cypress foliage?
You know, I would think that would work as well, because you know, you know, a lot of the evergreens seem to be pretty good at being water resistant. You know, I mean, you know, I would think that would probably be good as well. I mean, I know there are some, you know, you have some, you know, trees, you know, or you know, leaves that, you know, maybe put off, you know, maybe some like certain oils or maybe certain, you know, things like that you may need to be careful about. I don't know which ones those are in particular, but that's a good question. I've never heard that as being used as a nest material, but I would offhand, I would think it would work fine.
And the last question before we'll let you get back to this wonderful presentation, Tom Zoll, will you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, Matt. Yes, my only encounter with doing this successfully or turned out unsuccessfully was that I thought I had a martin. I announced it to the martin world, and then eventually I realized that it was a starling.
Mm-hmm.
I can't see purple from 20 or 30 feet away. How do I tell? I didn't have a lowering house at the time. How do I tell that I've got the wrong bird?
Well, good question, and I'm going to cover that a little bit later in the presentation. But that's probably the most common, and it's certainly understandable. I hope you didn't beat yourself up too badly, because they from a distance they definitely resemble each other, the coloration. But you know, you look for key things with the starlings. General body shape, the legs. The starlings have considerably longer legs. They're more, you know, like used for like walking and, you know, being on the ground. The beak is another big one. The starlings have a really long, sharp yellow beak, and the martins, of course, don't have a relatively short, dark colored beak. So that's a good question. But I'm going to show some slides coming up that'll help illustrate that a little bit more. But that is not uncommon to get those two confused.
Thanks.
Sure.
Great, thank you, Matt. It's all yours.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone, for those questions. So we talked about earlier about, you know, attracting the martins. This is just kind of a little little schematic right here. It does say 40 feet minimum right here. But, you know, again, this actually was, this drawing was done by the PMCA, and they're actually located up in Pennsylvania. So again, you know, we talked about, you know, you don't have quite as high a concentration of martins further up north, so they're going to be a little more, a little less tolerant rather of tall trees or structures nearby. But, you know, as a general rule, you know, 30 feet for our area between where your housing is going to be and tall trees. Now, one thing that I have seen is, and as indicated right here, you know, they drop down 10 feet between the martin housing and a tall, like this is probably like a 2-story house. Martins are much more tolerant of tall human structures being in close proximity to their house than they are trees. So, and again, I mean, because it's going to be a lot harder for a hawk to hide on a rooftop than as opposed to being, you know, nestled down, you know, deep inside of a tree. You also notice right here, it does say 120 feet maximum. That goes back to, again, it needing to be in close proximity to, you know, human activity, human structures, where there's just basically where there's going to be humans, you know, doing their thing, walking around and just being there. So, just, you know, to give you some good examples, this would be a definite candidate to be able to attract martins. You can see it, you know, wide open yard. There's some trees, tall trees, but they're way off, you know, far away. That would be a definite good candidate. And where's my pointer again? I keep losing my pointer. There's my pointer. This is another yard, another good example of a candidate, good candidate. Now you notice these little trees right here. They look like some sort of little pear trees or something. They're not very tall. Maybe some crepe myrtles over here, a palm tree. These are not very tall trees. So you know, a tall martin house right here, even if that was closer than 30 feet to some of these trees, that's really not going to be a problem. So this is another example of a yard that, you know, would be, you know, shouldn't have a problem attracting them. Then you start getting into, you know, tall trees. A situation like this is a beautiful yard, but this is going to be much more difficult to attract martins to a yard in this situation. You can see you have tall trees just all around, and again, you know, martins. There was a person that compared martins to the way they like to land and take off. They like to land and take off like airplanes, so that they like to, you know, fly off the housing and swoop horizontal, you know, going out real wide with wide open areas. So they don't like to come in down vertically. So a lot of people think, oh, well, I have tall trees all around, but maybe there's an open spot in the canopy or something where they can land up and down like a helicopter. But they don't like doing that. They like being able to you know, to come in kind of at a horizontal angle and land, you know, coming in just, you know, again, sort of like an airplane. But this would be a tough situation right here. And then another example, again, this would be just, yeah, this would be really tough. I would suggest putting up maybe some eastern bluebird houses in this situation, which are fun birds actually. But yeah, this is another one just to give you an idea, you know, of you know, what would work, what might not work, you know, kind of thing. We're talking earlier, there was one of the folks were asking about attracting martins. Here are two of the recordings I was talking about. The dawn song, the purple martin dawn song. That's actually, it's interesting. Adult male martins, the after second year martins, whenever early in the season. And it's important to note the subadult martins arrive quite a bit later than the adult martins. Now, why exactly that is, I don't know. There's speculation that maybe they're molting later than the adult martins, and maybe they're waiting for that to complete. I'm not sure. Someone may know. I actually don't, but I do know, like in this area, you'll start having the adult or after second year martins arriving in this area starting around mid to late February and then throughout throughout March and maybe a little bit into April. But the subadult martins, the SY martins, you usually will not start seeing those arrive until probably, probably late March, early April, and then throughout April, and sometimes even into May a little bit. So they're definitely a chunk later. As a general rule, what I've noticed in this area, the subadult martins arrive around, if you happen to watch birds a lot, when our little chimney swift friends roll into town, that's about the same time the subadult martins arrive. So whenever you start seeing chimney swifts, that's about the same time that the subadult martins start making it in. But the adult martins, adult male martins, early in the season, whenever the females, their mates start laying eggs, they will fly way up high in the sky during the pre-dawn hours and perform a particular type of song. And it's been coined the dawn song. And so that's what this CD is doing, is you play that outside, ideally at the same time during the pre-dawn hours, if you can, in a way that, doesn't, drive any neighbors crazy. That's one way to help attract martins. It's just letting martins know, hey, not only are there martins here, but there's successful nesting going on, because the males won't start doing that until egg laying starts initially. Then you have this daytime chatter, which is another good one. You can play, all day long, morning, evening. Another real good one you can play during the day that'll help, bring martins in to take a closer look at your housing. Here's the decoys, that you can, hang and clip onto certain areas. The pine needles right here, that's another good attraction technique. Preload those nests, with some pine needles, and that will make your housing look all the more attractive. Okay, now earlier there was brief talk about starlings, and this next slide I think kind of illustrates the overall feeling about those two species. This is the European starling, and this is the English house sparrow. This is a male English house sparrow. Starling is a little bit more difficult to tell. I can't tell offhand if that's a male or female. They look very similar. Both of these, as the name implies, are non-native invasive species. They are not protected by any laws, so they can be, managed. However, these two are also secondary cavity nesters. They're very aggressive in their secondary cavity nesters, and these two species of birds have done more to stunt the growth, and if anything, cause the population to go down of purple martins than probably anything. Housing competition, the martins competing for the same housing with these two very much more aggressive species has been a huge problem for the overall martin numbers in the eastern part of the U.S. and Canada. So we'll talk first about the English house sparrow. The males are really easy to identify. They have that little black mask and sort of little black bib. The female, you can see right here, kind of a lighter colored bill. They're, obviously very easy to differentiate, from martins, but these can be very problematic for people, especially people that are trying to attract martins for the first time. If you have some of these little boogers that will start to nest, they'll think the house is theirs, and they'll try to drive investigating martins away, which if there's anything that can make someone's blood pressure go up, watching something like that happen is definitely one of them. The European starling. Now, if you recall earlier in the presentation, I said if you're going to be using larger compartments, whether it's the larger 6 by 12 inch, or housing compartments or larger gourds, you want to try to make sure they're equipped with starling resistant entrances. And the reason for that is European starlings really like deep, dark cavities. You may have seen them even nesting in like street light, poles where maybe there's a little cover plate that doesn't completely cover where a lot of the cabling goes in. and they'll be way down in there. They love these deep, dark cavities. Well, whenever you expand and enlarge the size of these cavities on this martin housing, you inadvertently make a darker, cavity as well. There's not as much light that's able to penetrate to the back of the compartment. So that automatically makes those larger compartments much more attractive to European starlings. Starlings are very aggressive. They will kill adult martins to take over a cavity. They absolutely have no shame. And if you can see that sharp beak, and they have, fairly decent little claws. They are built for close quarters combat. And martins have no chance if they engage in a fight with these starlings. So along came in 1990, around 91, it was in the early 90s, a gentleman named Charlie McEwen up in New Brunswick, Canada, realized that starlings from their back down to their keel bone are larger, they're deeper, if you will, than the slimmer martins. And so he realized that if this particular hole, this is what started the starling resistant entrances, and it's just called the crescent. It kind of looks like a crescent, but that the specific measurement that if he made it a certain size, that the martins could still squeeze in and out of these entrances, but the starlings could not. And so that was really huge, a huge leap forward in protecting martins from these European starlings. Now, these other ones are all, just sort of, building a better mousetrap, so to speak. Now, one thing I will add, this excluder entrance, and if you notice, the ones that have these little twin pegs here and here, and then here and here, they all carry that excluder name. The excluder entrances were originally developed by a gentleman up in Pennsylvania named Duke Snyder. He was originally trying to attract martins. He did attract a nesting pair. He was using crescent entrances, but he had a starling that came in, got through the crescent, and killed his one, I think either one or both, I think just one of his nesting, his pair of martins. What he realized by watching the starling closely is that the starling was actually rotating its body. So again, remember, if the starling goes head on, just goes straight in, it can't make it in. But the starling was actually rotating its body, so utilizing this distance here and able to squeeze in. So what he did is he developed this entrance that has these twin pegs. What all that does is that it keeps the starling from contorting or twisting its body to the left or to the right to try to gain access. These pegs force the starling to go straight in. So these are a lot more effective. The crescents are very effective. I use those. The EIH housing uses them. I'd say in most areas the crescents are very effective, but there are some areas that have very, very heavy starling pressure that really have to up the protection and go with one of these excluder style entrances. Okay, the purple martin and starling ID. It is easy, definitely easy to get these two mixed up. Both have, the dark plumage. Both, I mean, they're fairly close in size, and from far away, it's very easy to get the two mixed up. But if you look at these photos, again, you can see sort of the differentiating factors. The bill, the beak is a huge one. That long yellow sharp beak. You can see the martins much shorter, just a black beak. The feet, the starlings have these really long legs, bright pink feet. The martins do not. You can also see, you notice on the martins, the wingtips, like all swallows, they have those beautiful long wings that extend almost all the way down to the end of the tail. And the starlings, has shorter wings. Another thing here. Here's another comparison. This one really highlighting the leg differences. The martins, a lot of swallows, they're so tailored for flight. They have these little bitty short legs, and if you ever see martins or any swallow on the ground, they look so funny. They have these little bitty legs that are just kind of just shuffling along. But the starlings, you can see, have considerably longer legs, definitely more adapted to be, on the ground foraging for food. So that's another thing that could help you out right there to differentiate the two. Nest identification. This is a picture of a standard purple martin nest. You know, fairly neat as far as bird nests go, pretty compact. You can see the pine needles that this is actually a house that my martin house. I put the pine needles in there. They're still using them. Martins, one thing that's interesting. This is an adaptation, or this is something that's left over from their days, I think, of nesting in natural structures, is these little mud dams. And what's interesting is, all things being equal, the housing, you know, in one colony site that's in the same exact housing, you'll have some pairs of martins that will build a little mud dam. You'll have some that'll build a considerable mud dam. You'll have some that won't build any mud dam at all. And so I think that's just building these little mud dams, just something that maybe is left over from when they were nesting back in natural structures, because no doubt the mud dam provided an added layer, like a berm, an added layer of protection between the outside and the nest contents. So you can see in here these little leaves. Right when the martins, before they start laying eggs, you'll be able you'll know that they're about to start laying eggs. You'll see them start carrying just individual leaves into the compartments. And what they do is they line the nest cup with those leaves, and then they lay the eggs. So as soon as if you see martins and they're just gathering single leaves and taking those to the nest, egg laying is imminent. It's very close. Here, okay, here's a European starling nest, typical of a European starling nest. You can see not near as neat, just using a lot more, just straw and just grasses. A lot of times, you'll see junk in there, straw wrappers, zip ties, whatever they can find. The eggs are another big indicator. Martin eggs, let me go back. Martins lay, their eggs are just snow white eggs. The starling eggs are usually this blue. Now, there are times where the starling eggs will be much whiter than these, but for the most part, they will be this bluish color. So that's an example of a starling nest. And then the easiest one to tell is a sparrow nest. Sparrows will literally just pack a compartment. This is in a bluebird house. Pack a compartment, literally just stuff it. It's just to the top with as much as they possibly can. There'll be one little tiny hole leading to the back, and they go in and out. And then the sparrow eggs, of course, are these lighter colored eggs with a darker speckling, and they're much smaller. You can see for a size comparison next to a quarter, they're considerably smaller. One thing we talked about is house sparrows and starlings and keeping them out of the housing. And one thing, I don't want to go too deep into the weeds on this, but there's a lot of martin landlords out there, martin enthusiasts that will right out of the gate tell people, well, you need to be ready to trap and euthanize or shoot sparrows or starlings that that are trying to take over your martin housing. And granted, that is really the ideal way to deal with these birds, because if you just trap them and take them somewhere else, you're really just dumping the problem onto somebody else. However, that can be daunting, understandably. That can be daunting and something that a lot of people aren't willing to do. So at the end of the day, if all you do, and this goes back to having housing that's important, that's easy, it's important that's easily lowered and raised vertically. If you're trying to attract martins, or you have martins already, and say you get a sparrow that's starting to nest in it, if all you do is just lower the housing and tear out the sparrow nests and do nothing more, you're already ahead and doing more than the majority of martin colonies out there, which the majority of them are completely unmanaged whatsoever. So, it's one of those things. Just start out just with just tearing out the sparrow nests, and that's a great start. And as you feel more comfortable the way you control these situations, you can get there. One thing I would like to point out, though, for someone that does, if you are going to be tearing out sparrow nests, one thing that's important to note is there is actually, and it almost sounds like completely made up, but it actually is a real thing, house sparrow revenge syndrome. And there was a landlord up in Northwest Louisiana that saw firsthand that he would conduct house sparrow nest tear outs, because a lot of times if you tear out their nest, they're going to turn back, they're going to rebuild it to beat the band. And so sometimes it turns into just this battle of wills between you and the house sparrows. Well, what he saw was when the sparrows, whenever he tore out the nests, the male house sparrows would be quite agitated. And if the martins had already, in the surrounding cavities, had already started laying eggs, the male sparrow would go around and start pecking holes in the eggs and really wreaking havoc in the surrounding martin nests, and hence the name house sparrow revenge syndrome. And to further prove that theory, Mike Scully, a gentleman, he teaches at a high school in San Antonio, he actually did a study, and he said right here, this was back in 2008, where he pulled did house sparrow nest tear outs, and continued to do them even after the martins had laid eggs. And doing that, the egg to fledge success rate of the martins in that particular house was only 15%. So only 15% of the eggs that were laid in that house actually made it to a fledgling martin. Not very good. The next year, he did the same thing, but this time he only did one preseason nest pull out, just one. Then once the martin started laying eggs, he didn't touch the house sparrow nest anymore after that. And that same housing, the egg to fledge ratio shot up to 50%. So what's the takeaway from that? If you do have a martin house and you're not trapping and or shooting where available the house sparrows, if you're not directly eliminating the sparrows, and you're just doing nest tear outs, that's fine. But if you have martins also nesting in the housing, once the martins have started laying eggs, go ahead and hold off on it, because it can cause some problems. So let me go to the next one. We also talked about the easy raising and lowering. Jumpers. From time to time, you may see martin babies that are jumping out of the house that are not quite ready to fly yet, and they're running around the yard, and you don't know why. In our area, it's usually due to one of two things: heat. If we have a major heat wave, that can sometimes cause it, but a lot of times it's caused by a major feather mite infestation. And this was some poor volunteer that stuck his hand probably in a mite infested martin nest and got covered with them. If you have mites like this, a mite infestation will cause babies to jump early. Now, there are two ways you can handle this. One is you keep just some fresh nest material available, and you lower the martin house and go through and pull all the old mite infested nest material out. Maybe get some rubbing alcohol, just wipe down the compartment walls, put fresh nest material back in, and put the babies and eggs, back in. Of course, if you do all that, you make sure you do your research before you do that, because you want to make sure you're adequately documenting, which nest, goes where. You want to do one at a time, so you don't start getting eggs and babies mixed up. A capped egg right here, this happens from time to time. You can see this is an egg right here, and the piece of an egg off one that already hatched got stuck to the top of this one egg. That could potentially cause a baby to not be able to get out. Those are just a couple of things that you can deal with much more easily if you have housing that is able to be raised and lowered vertically, very easy. So again, this is what a typical martin house you would see, for years, just, bustling with martins, everything, was looking great. Here's another one right here, common sight, for a long time. Now you're starting to see a little more of this. You see, house, nice looking wooden martin house. You see a pair of martins, but you also, you see, there's a pair of English house sparrows. Here's another female English house sparrow. Here's another one right here. See a pair of martins, but there's an English house sparrow right here. It's important to note that, anytime sparrows are allowed to nest alongside martins, that reproductive, even if you're not doing nest tear outs, that reproductive success of the martins goes down. These little sparrows are very very sneaky. They'll go back behind the martins' backs while they're out feeding and try to deliberately undermine their nesting attempts. So they're just bad for business all the way around. This is unfortunately an all too common sight these days. This is what, if an unmanaged martin house, this is eventually what it's going to look like. This is a casserole of non-native pests. You have a starling, European starling up here, then you have a bunch of sparrows just partying down here, and there's not a single martin anywhere to be found on this house. They wouldn't have a chance in that house. Let's see, I'm getting close here. Okay, the housing we talked about, the leaf gathering, that starts, and the dawn singing, talked about that, that occurs the same time egg laying start. The female martin, she'll lay 2 to 7 pure white eggs, and they lay those at a rate of 1 egg per day. Incubation lasts approximately 15 days, and the female martin starts to incubate the eggs after the next to last egg is laid, and that helps just to kick off the growth at a kind of a uniform time so they all hatch as closely together as possible. Here's a cute little picture of a female martin. A lot of times when you lower the house, the female martin will just sit there and just kind of look at you. You know, I think that to me, that's another indicator right there that they understand that we are, you know, not only not a threat, but just they're, you know, we're good. We're good for them. We're there to help them. Here's a picture of some babies that was taken at EIH. Those are approximately 6 to 7 days old right there. The parents feed both the young until they're approximately 26 to 32 days old, at which point they fledge. The young will continue to be dependent on the parents for food and for training to catch food for about 1 to 2 weeks after fledging. And it's not uncommon for the martins to return to their martin housing at night. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It's really a mixed bag. Here's some babies at approximately 11 to 12 days old. And just to give you an idea real quick of the growth rate and how quickly they grow, you can see 1 day to 5 days to 7 days to 12 days. Again, 16 to 20 to 22 to 26. Once they reach 26 days, this is pretty much at a fledgling age that they're ready to fledge. Real quick, Maureen, I promise I just have just a couple more slides and that's it. So we talked about the pre-migratory roosts. Your home colony, when martins are done nesting, a lot of times during the day they'll go to little staging areas just during the day, and that can still be up to, you know, upwards, you know, maybe of 100 martins or so. But the big pre-migratory roosts are where they all congregate. Once they're totally done nesting, it's where they congregate and gather before they start making their way south. And let's see, here is right here to give you an idea on how massive these roosts are. This is a Doppler weather radar that was taken in the greater Atlanta area some years back. And you see these roost rings, these little rings on the Doppler weather radar. Those are actually purple martin roosts. In the morning, they disperse out in different directions to go feed during the day, and the evenings they come back. This is early in the morning when they're dispersing. There's so many martins that they show up like this on Doppler weather radars. It's absolutely amazing. There is a roost right there that was, I don't know why that is not playing, but that was just some birds that were actually at a roost over. You can just kind of see there's a lot, just tens of thousands of birds at one of these roosts in Houston. And then I'll just end it with this. Martins, you know, they really need all the help they can get. Care, you know, landlords, good management. This is what the martin range and concentration of martins looked like probably 60 years ago, 50 to 60 years ago. They were all over in their range, very high numbers. This is probably what it actually is about now. You can see much, much less. And this, by and large, is due to the sparrow and starling competition for housing. And I'll end it with that. And this is the Purple Martin Conservation's website. Everything that I've talked about and 100 times more is all available on this website right here. So feel free to go check those out. And that's it.
Okay, thank you. We do have some more questions, actually some related questions. And Walter, would you unmute and ask your question?
Well, it's Olivia, not Walter. It wasn't really
Okay.
a question. We were just going to share that we've had our Purple Martin house out on our pier. So it's basically over the water for 25 years.
Mhm.
And that has been so successful. They really like being out over the water. And I have a theory that the starlings and the sparrows stay away because of the water. I'm not sure if that's true, but we don't have that problem.
Well, it's interesting you say that. Well, first of all, I am envious, and myself and anyone that has martins or trying to attract martins of you or anyone else that is on the water, because no doubt that is so much. Martins absolutely love being right on the water in close proximity to water. So I know that's got to be a fantastic setup y'all have. But to your point, I have heard the same thing. There's actually some pictures. I wish I could go back and find them, of a gentleman, I think it was up in Michigan, and he actually put up a few Martin house poles actually out in the water, about probably 20 feet off the shore in a small lake. And he saw the same thing, that there was a lack of interest, to say the least, by sparrows and starlings in his houses once they were moved out over the water like that. So no, I think there's some definite truth to that. I absolutely believe it. I appreciate you pointing that out, because I think that really there may be something to that for sure.
There was a related question from Diane, and I wonder if she got her question answered. But Diane, go ahead and unmute, and if you want to follow up on that.
Okay, well, I'm hoping I'm the one wrong, because it'd be perfect for me to put it out on my pier. I was told that it was an issue to put them over water because as the young are beginning to fledge, they might fall into the water and not be able to get out.
Well, there is, that certainly, could be a problem. I guess one way that you can look at it, though, is, if everything is going pretty, well in the housing, and you're not dealing with any sort of, an issue with mites or anything like that, for the most part, you won't have much of a problem, if any, with premature fledging. But if you do, the argument could be made, that, certainly it would be, bad for them to jump out into the water. But if they jumped out, even like out into, on land or in the, in someone's yard or on someone's property, unless they immediately, someone was watching and saw it, I don't know how long they would last like that anyway, especially with like, outdoor cats roaming around, things like that. So, that's definitely, I've heard that as well, the concern about that, but I would think, me personally, I think the benefits would outweigh the negatives on having the Martin house mounted over water. I think the benefits would outweigh the potential of having early jumpers like that.
Thank you. That's makes my problem of where to put it a whole lot easier.
Good.
Well, we had two other questions, also somewhat related and having to do with raptors. Oh, I'm trying to find the first one. Let's see. Oh, Verva, you actually had a question.
I did. We have a Cooper's hawk that sits on the roof of our Purple Martin house, and we always say it licks its jaws. It says it's my deli. How do we discourage it?
I had a feeling, Verva, that you were going to say Cooper's hawk, because Cooper's hawks have become the bane of songbird and hobbyists and enthusiasts' existence. They, for a long time, we fell just outside of the Cooper's hawk's normal nesting range, but they have exploded in numbers, and no doubt, benefiting from the strict protections that all raptors enjoy. But there have been numerous people posting on the Purple Martin forum that have had their colonies decimated by Cooper's hawks. And to be honest with you, I don't know of an effective way to deal with it. I just don't. They are so smart. People will be outside they'll hear their martins, scatter and start, doing their alarm calls. And the Cooper's hawks are so hyper focused, they'll fly literally just at head height right by them, completely ignore the human that's waving their hands up and down and screaming, and just keep going right for the martin to get it. That's one I just don't know. I mean, I know people will put cages around hardware cloth or some type of like fencing around the outside of their housing, which is fine if they're in the housing. But the problem is, we know that martins, when they get startled or scared, they scramble and leave the housing. And then that's when those Cooper's hawks are so agile and so quick. I don't know. Verva, that's one of the toughest things right now that I've seen, with the, being a martin landlord, is dealing with this increase in these small, particularly the accipiter raptors. Of just, of them just wreaking havoc on our songbirds.
All right, thank you, Matt. And thank you. I know you're going to get thank yous from other people, but personally, thank you very much. This was so interesting, just wonderful. And I'll turn it back to Bruce.
John, you had a very similar question. You can go ahead and ask if you would like. That was John Wright. Well, John,
I think he was making fun of me.
No, Verva, are you there?
John would never do that.
Verva?
But John's question actually looked pretty legitimate. Again,
Let's see, Verva, can you hear me?
Yes.
we hear you.
Yeah, no, I just, I think there's some other things you could do. You could, start raising chickens or something like this and keep them in the yard, because most Coopers would prefer to eat a small chicken to a purple martin.
Dang homeowner association.
Right. That's a good point. I know, it's I don't know if misery loves company or not, but it's I know there's a lot of people that have different types of homing pigeons or roller pigeons or anything else that have also have been hit so hard with the huge increase in the amount of Cooper's hawks. And they're just, what's interesting is I see some places, I'll say this, there's some, if you're fortunate enough to live in an area that has, like the neighborhood that I'm in, seems to have a resident pair of the little larger red-shouldered hawks. And ever since the red-shouldered hawks have moved into town, I have seen much less Cooper's hawk activity. So, and again, that's a very loosely based theory on my part. I don't know if there's any credence to that at all, but I know sometimes if you're lucky enough to have maybe some of the bigger hawks, the red-shouldered hawks certainly would not turn their nose up to a songbird feast, but they're not near as agile as the smaller Cooper's hawks, and seem to go more after like squirrels or a little bit more substantial fare. But yeah, that's
Matthew. This is all just tongue in cheek. We have a hawk watch that's been going on for a little over 20 years over at Sylvan Beach as Spring Hawk Watch, and we try to focus on the diurnal raptors. Yeah. Obviously, I'm not serious about putting chickens out, but Vera, I'd like to have your purple martin house plants, because Lynn and I would love to have Cooper's hawks hanging around all the time.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It's and what makes it even worse, as if sparrows, starlings, snakes, Cooper's hawks, aren't enough. Sometimes at night, anyone that has martins or has been around a martin colony at night, you'll hear them bustling and chirping around and making noise and everything else. And then you have the owl. If you happen to have owls in the area, then they move in. It's just, I'm telling you, it's never a dull moment, for sure.
Well, Matt, we want to thank you, and I want you to know a couple of things. One, we had 60 participants And we still have 41, so people were just really interested. And I know they can email you at fendley@uhcl.edu.
Yes.
And my personal comment is that I learned that in my yard, I can't put up a house because they have tall trees.
Mhm.
And I also have those darn house sparrows. So, but I do have chimney swifts, so I'm close.
Oh,
Anyway,
that's wonderful. It's, I mean, you know, with all the, you know, in the past 30 years with the increase of all those chimney caps, you know, people capping off their chimneys, that's another thing. You know, the poor chimney swifts have lost so much habitat that's super exciting to hear about anyone that's actually hosting chimney swifts, you know, whether it's in a purpose-built tower or in their, you know, actual chimney or anything. So that's really neat. That's really
it's
neat.
in the chimney. Okay, well, we thank you so much. And